The dawn came thin and pale over the Wyoming hills, like it was unsure of itself, like it knew it was about to witness something it had no right to see. Sarah May Whitlow pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped from the cabin porch, boots quiet against the packed earth, heart thudding louder than the creek beyond the cottonwoods. She had planned this moment through 3 sleepless nights, waiting for the ranch to settle, waiting for the man inside to breathe deep enough to forget she existed. She told herself she was only a guest, a helper paid in meals and silence, not a woman tangled in another man's unfinished grief. The sky smelled of cold ash and sage, and freedom should have smelled sweeter than that. She moved toward the corral with careful steps, skirt gathered in one hand, small satchel in the other, everything she owned fitting into a space no bigger than a saddlebag. Behind her the cabin stood dark and still, logs holding secrets, walls remembering voices that no longer spoke. She did not look back, because if she did she might remember the way his voice softened when he said her name, the way his eyes lingered too long when he thought she wasn't watching. She had come to the Crossbar Ranch to cook and clean for a widowed cattleman, nothing more, nothing dangerous. Yet here she was, sneaking away like a thief, like a woman who knew staying meant surrender. The horse shifted before she saw him, a broad chestnut gelding standing square in the narrow path between the fence and the cottonwoods, ears forward, breath steaming in the dawn light. He was not tied, not grazing, he was waiting. Sarah stopped short, her pulse jumping into her throat. The path beyond him led down to the creek crossing, and then on to the wagon road. The way out, she whispered a curse under her breath, and took a cautious step forward. The horse did not move. His dark eyes followed her, steady and unblinking, like he had been told to stand there and guard something precious. She tried to edge around him, murmuring soft, like she'd done with skittish mares back home. But the gelding shifted sideways, blocking her again, hooves crunching softly, patient but firm. Sarah let out a shaky breath, anger flaring to cover the fear. She raised her hand, not to strike but to shoo him off, and that was when she heard the creak of the cabin door behind her, slow and unmistakable. Her shoulders stiffened. She did not turn, because she knew without looking who stood there. She could feel him the way you feel a storm before the thunder sounds. Caleb Cross did not speak right away. He leaned against the doorframe, tall and rough-cut, from years of wind and sun, hair dark and uncombed, eyes sharp despite the early hour. He watched the scene like a man studying a painting he already understood. "Sarah," he said at last, her name low and even, not angry, not surprised, like he had known this moment was coming and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. She swallowed, pride stiffening her spine. "I was leaving before you woke," she said, voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. He almost smiled at that. "Almost. I've been awake a while," Caleb replied, stepping off the porch, boots slow in the dirt. The horse flicked an ear toward him, but held his ground. "You always leave quiet, even in your sleep." That stopped her. She turned then, meeting his gaze for the first time that morning. There was no accusation in his eyes, only something heavier, something like resignation mixed with resolve. She hated that look more than anger. It made her feel seen in ways she wasn't ready for. "I don't belong here," she said, words she had practiced until they felt thin. "I never did." He stopped a few paces away, close enough that she could smell coffee and leather and the faint smoke of last night's fire. "This ranch been full of folks who didn't belong," he said. "My wife said that once, before she decided it was home." The name of his dead wife hung between them without being spoken. Sarah felt it like a weight on her ribs. She had promised herself she would never compete with a ghost, never try to fill a space carved by tragedy. That was not her burden to carry. "I ain't asking you to replace anyone," Caleb continued, voice rougher now. "I'm asking you not to run before the sun's even up." The horse shifted again, closer now, his flank nearly brushing Sarah's skirt, trapping her between muscle and memory. She laughed softly, a sound edged with nerves. "You trained him well," she said, trying for lightness, trying not to look at the way Caleb's hands flexed at his sides like he was holding himself back. He shook his head, didn't tell him a thing. Animals just know when someone's trying to leave something unfinished. That did it. Her breath caught. Dawn brightened around them, spilling gold over the hills, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the Crossbar Ranch, Sarah realized leaving might take more courage than staying, and that frightened her more than anything else. Morning stretched itself wide over the Crossbar Ranch, turning the frost to mist and the mist to memory. Sarah stood where the horse had penned her in, yet the pen felt wider now, like the land itself was holding its breath. Caleb walked past her toward the corral, slow and deliberate, not touching her, not telling her what to do, and that restraint unsettled her more than force ever could. She followed because standing still hurt worse. The ranch came alive in small sounds, a gate creaking, a crow calling from the far fence line, leather shifting on saddle rails. And with every step Sarah felt the weight of the choice she had tried to make alone slipping from her grasp. She had always believed leaving clean was the kindest way. That absence could be a mercy, yet the way Caleb moved through his morning, steady and scarred and present, made her question whether running spared anyone at all. They worked without speaking for a long while, feeding horses, checking a fence that had sagged near the creek, the sun climbing higher until the chill broke. Sarah's hands remembered the work like an old song, muscle and bone easing into purpose. Caleb watched her when he thought she was not looking, noting the way she lifted heavy things without complaint, the way she paused to soothe a skittish colt with a murmur and a touch. It struck him then that she had already woven herself into the ranch in ways neither of them had named. When he finally spoke, it was to tell her about the storm that had taken his wife 3 winters back, not the dramatic parts folks in town whispered about, but the quiet aftermath, the empty chair, the way grief sat down beside him at supper and stayed. Sarah listened, heart tight, understanding dawning that his life had not stopped when she arrived, it had only been waiting to move again. By midday they sat on the low hill beyond the barn, sharing bread and jerky, the land rolling away in every direction like an answer too large to argue with. Sarah confessed why she ran from places just as roots began to take. A childhood spent moving from one half-promise to another, a father who taught her that staying was another word for losing. Caleb did not interrupt, did not offer fixes. He only nodded like a man recognizing a trail he had walked himself. When she finished, there was a long silence, filled not with discomfort, but with the sound of wind combing the grass. He told her he would not chain her to the ranch with guilt or need, that if she left tomorrow he would saddle her a horse and see her safely to the road. The freedom in his words frightened her more than his horse blocking the path at dawn. Trouble came the way it always did, quiet at first, a rider on the far ridge, dust lifting behind him like a warning. The man arrived with a smile that never reached his eyes, a banker from Cheyenne, with papers folded neat in his coat, debt spoken of in polite tones that cut sharper than curses. Sarah watched Caleb read the numbers, his jaw setting. The crossbar was behind. Too many bad seasons stacked one atop another. The banker's gaze slid to Sarah, weighing her like an asset, a thought that made her stomach turn. After the man rode off, promise of return hanging like a noose, Caleb stared out over the land he loved, shoulders squared against a future that suddenly felt narrow. Sarah understood then that her leaving had never been just about her heart. It had been about avoiding the moment when another man's fight might ask something of her. That night the ranch felt smaller, shadows thicker, the fire burning low while the truth took up space between them. Caleb admitted he had hoped her leaving would hurt less if it happened before things got worse. Sarah laughed softly at the bitter symmetry of it. 2 people trying to spare each other by walking away. She told him about the money she had saved, meager but real. The idea of pooling resources felt dangerous and intimate, like tying a knot that could not be loosened. Caleb said he would not take a dime from her unless she chose it freely, unless staying was not a debt but a decision. The words settled into her bones, challenging the old lessons she had carried for so long. Sleep did not come easy. When dawn edged the window again, Sarah rose, not to flee but to think. She walked the familiar path toward the cottonwoods, the horse watching her from the corral, no longer a guard but a witness. She realized then that leaving had been her armor, staying her risk, and risk was where life had always waited, just beyond her reach. When she returned to the cabin, Caleb was already awake, coffee steaming between them like a truce. She told him she would stay through the winter. No promises beyond that, just time earned honestly. His relief was quiet, respectful, the way a man accepts a gift he knows he cannot demand. Days fell into a harder rhythm after that, repairs to make, cattle to move, neighbors to ask for help. Sarah worked beside Caleb, learning the lay of the land and the weight of responsibility. She saw him bend under it and rise again, not because he was unbreakable, but because the land asked it of him. They spoke more freely now, laughter finding space among the worry, and in the evenings, when the fire burned low again, the silence felt companionable rather than strained. Yet the banker's shadow loomed, a reminder that choice alone did not mend broken ledges. On the edge of winter's first true storm, Caleb took Sarah to the high fence line, showing her the place where his wife used to stand to watch the herds move like dark rivers across the plain. He told her he did not expect her to replace any memory, only to make new ones if she wished. Sarah looked out at the land, at the horse tracks etched into the frost, at the ranch that had tried to hold her at dawn and was now asking her plainly to stay. She felt fear, yes, but beneath it, a steadiness she had never known. And as the snow began to fall, soft and certain, she understood that dawn had not blocked her path. It had only asked her to choose it. Winter came down hard on the Crossbar Ranch, not all at once, but with a patience that tested resolve. Snow piling against fences, wind worrying the eaves like it meant to pry the place apart. Sarah learned the weight of each day by how much strength it took to meet it. Her hands cracked and healed and cracked again. Her breath fogged the air beside Caleb's as they worked cattle through drifts that swallowed a horse's knees. The banker's words lived like a burr under the saddle, always there, always rubbing, yet something quieter grew alongside the fear. A trust earned, not by promises but by shared labor and shared silence. Nights found them at the same table, steam rising from tin cups, the fire throwing shadows that no longer felt lonely. And Sarah understood that staying had not made her smaller, as she once believed. It had given her edges something solid to press against. The storm that changed everything arrived without ceremony, a white wall rolling in from the west, swallowing sky and horizon until the world narrowed to sound and instinct. A section of fence gave way under the weight of ice. Cattle scattering toward the ravine, Caleb rode out despite Sarah's protest. His jaw set in that way that told her arguing would waste time they did not have. She saddled up anyway, fear sharp and clarifying, following his tracks into the roar of wind. The land erased itself around them, and in that blankness every choice felt final. When Caleb's horse stumbled near the ravine edge, Sarah acted without thinking, shouting, throwing her rope, grounding him long enough to regain balance. The moment burned into her like a brand. Proof that she was no longer a woman passing through, but one whose hands could tip the scales between loss and survival. They found shelter in a stand of pines, waiting out the worst of it with cattle huddled close. Caleb looked at her with something like awe, stripped of romance, replaced by respect earned in the currency of risk. "You didn't have to come," he said, voice rough from cold and truth. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Neither did you." And in that simple exchange something settled between them. Not passion flaring bright and quick, but a deeper heat, the kind that holds when the fire burns low. When they finally made it back to the ranch, battered and spent, the cabin felt smaller yet stronger, like a heart that had been tested and chosen to keep beating. The banker returned after the storm, his certainty dulled by the sight of fences standing, cattle accounted for, neighbors lending hands unasked, community forming where isolation once ruled. Sarah stood beside Caleb as he spoke, her presence unspoken leverage, not as property or promise, but as proof that the Crossbar was no longer a man alone against the ledger. Terms shifted, not generous but survivable. Time bought with grit and goodwill. When the man rode away, Sarah felt a release she had not allowed herself to imagine. Yet she knew the victory was not final, only earned for now, and that was enough. Spring crept in shy and green, the land remembering how to soften. Sarah found herself waking before dawn, not to flee but to watch the light climb the hills. The same path where the horse had once blocked her now lay open, tracks leading both ways. She realized she could leave any morning she chose, and the knowledge steadied her rather than stirred restlessness. Caleb joined her sometimes, coffee warming their hands, conversations ranging from plans for the ranch to quiet confessions of fear neither had fully named before. Intimacy grew not from grand declarations but from shared mornings and honest fatigue. One dawn Caleb did what he had not done all winter. He asked her what she wanted beyond the season, not as a challenge or a claim but as a question offered freely. Sarah felt the old instinct to dodge, to keep the future light enough to run from, but she had learned the cost of that weightlessness. She spoke slowly, choosing truth over safety. She wanted a place where leaving was a choice, not a reflex, where staying did not mean erasing herself. Caleb listened, nodding, accepting her words without trying to shape them into something easier. In that acceptance, she felt more seen than she ever had by certainty or pursuit. The horse stood nearby, grazing, no longer a sentinel but a reminder. Sarah smiled at the memory of that first blocked path, understanding now that it had not been a trap but a pause. A moment carved out of habit, where she had been asked to look instead of run. She reached for Caleb's hand. The gesture, simple and unadorned, he squeezed back, not as a vow sealed forever but as a present truth, strong enough for the day it lived in, when the sun finally cleared the hills, painting the ranch gold. Sarah knew the road was still there, winding out toward other lives and other dawns, yet she also knew that if she ever walked it, she would do so carrying the knowledge that staying had once been the braver choice. That love in the West was not a thing that blocked paths, but one that stood aside and let a woman decide where her feet would land. And with that understanding she turned back toward the cabin, not because she was held, but because she chose to be home.